If you've ever heard an engine growl so fiercely it made your heart skip a beat, you already understand the magic of American muscle cars. This is where power, speed, and nostalgia collide, stirring up images of quarter-mile drag strips and open highways begging to be conquered. Today, we're exploring the history of American muscle cars, power, speed, and nostalgia. Buckle up for tall tales, fast facts, and a glimpse into raw automotive muscle. Let's dive right in. American muscle cars didn't just appear in 1964 with the Pontiac GTO, despite what many people claim. The real roots stretch back to the late 1940s with the Oldsmobile Rocket 88. It had a high-compression V8 engine that practically roared when you jabbed the gas. Some folks swear this was the true birth of the muscle concept, but at the time, nobody was calling it a muscle car. People just knew it was fast, it was cool, and it liked to show off on Main Street. The Rocket 88 had a relatively light body combined with a potent engine, making it an absolute joy for anyone who craved velocity, even if it did guzzle gas like it was going out of style. Controversy started simmering even then, with old-school hot rodders rolling their eyes, thinking the Rocket 88 was more of a factory trick than a real custom job. They believed the only real muscle cars were the ones built by gearheads in their garages, not by major automakers on assembly lines. Yet, as horsepower-hungry customers kept pestering their dealerships for even more power, the industry got the hint. Automakers weren't exactly sure what to call these new high-output vehicles, but they knew Americans were itching to burn rubber. That heady mix of torque and speed was almost like bottled adrenaline, and it set the stage for what was to come. Those early forerunners, besides the Rocket 88, you had the Hudson Hornet flexing its inline-six, showed the world that combining a large engine with a mid-sized body could transform everyday transportation into a thrilling performance machine. The seeds had been planted. Soon, everybody wanted a piece of that white-knuckle excitement, including Ford and Chrysler. And while the Rocket 88's advanced overhead valve V8 was a game-changer, it would take a few more years before muscle car became the phrase echoing in gearheads' garages and the late-night street racing scene. Just when GM thought they had conquered the muscle car scene, Mopar stepped in. Dodge and Plymouth were itching to stake their claim in the horsepower wars. The 1968 Dodge Charger RT remains an iconic staple of muscle car lore, especially with the legendary 426 Hemi under the hood. That engine had hemispherical combustion chambers, allowing for better airflow, which translated to monstrous horsepower. Some say it was underrated at 425 horsepower, whispering that the real figure might have been closer to 500. Meanwhile, Plymouth had the Roadrunner, a bare-bones approach to performance. It wasn't fancy, but it was fast. Plymouth famously paid Warner Brothers $50,000 to use the beep-beep horn sound from the cartoon, adding a playful twist to a car that could easily roast its tires. Mopar fans are notoriously passionate, and many claim these Dodge and Plymouth rides were the kings of the strip, leaving Camaros and Chevelles eating dust. Of course, if you bring that up at a Chevy owner's house, you might not get invited back for dinner. The fierce brand loyalty that grew out of these battles continues today in classic car clubs and online forums. All this talk of raw horsepower also brought in another dimension: racing success. NASCAR fans watched Dodge Daytonas and Plymouth Superbirds, odd-looking cars with massive rear wings, claim victories. These winged warriors were so successful that NASCAR officials changed the rules to ban them. This only cemented Mopar's reputation for pushing boundaries. Some considered it cheating, But Mopar aficionados shrugged and called it innovation. These controversies kept the hype alive and made the Mopar brand unforgettable. Much of this era's excitement still resonates, proving that muscle cars aren't just about engines. They're about legends, bragging rights, and maybe just a sprinkle of corporate rebellion. By 1970, horsepower numbers hit an all-time high, and so did the sheer variety of muscle car models. Dodge rolled out the Challenger, Plymouth introduced the Cuda, short for Barracuda, and the automotive world burst with more cubic inches and elaborate paint schemes than ever before. High-impact color names like Plum Crazy and Go Mango brightened suburban streets, making it obvious these cars were not about subtlety. They were about maximum effect. However, all that power came with downsides. Fuel efficiency was not a priority, and safety was an afterthought. Emissions regulations were tightening. Insurance companies started jacking up premiums for muscle car owners, branding them as risk magnets. Crashes involving muscle cars were sensationalized in the media, setting off alarm bells about their high-speed potential. Critics argued these vehicles encouraged reckless driving. The muscle car faithful responded by pointing to user error and saying speed limits still apply, even if the car can break them with a flick of the right foot. It was a fiery debate, though the looming threat of stricter environmental and safety standards was becoming more than a footnote. Despite the storm brewing on the regulatory horizon, 1970 was a shining peak for muscle cars. The new 426 Hemi found homes in Dodge and Plymouth models. The Chevy Chevelle SS 454 brandished monstrous torque. And Ford's Torino Cobra was no slouch either. Competition was so fierce that every brand tried to outdo the others in sheer horsepower numbers, creating a horsepower arms race. If you wanted to tear up the streets, you had a buffet of options. And if you wanted to win bragging rights at the drag strip, you didn't have to do much to these cars. Straight from the factory, they were already beasts on wheels. It was an era defined by raw adrenaline, but dark clouds of change were gathering. Everyone knows about the 1973 oil embargo and the subsequent fuel crisis, but many don't realize just how devastating it was for the muscle car movement. Suddenly, gas station lines stretched around corners. People panicked about fuel availability. The last thing on a typical driver's mind was 0 to 60 times. To make matters worse, a lot of big block engines needed premium fuel at a time when even regular gasoline was sometimes hard to come by. Emissions regulations were becoming more stringent, forcing automakers to dial back engine compression and add heavy, power-sapping exhaust equipment. Insurance rates soared, and younger buyers, once the driving force behind muscle car demand, found themselves priced out of the market. Ford, Chevrolet, and Mopar quickly realized that performance vehicles with massive engines weren't the moneymakers they used to be. Suddenly, many beloved models either disappeared or were drastically neutered. Horsepower ratings dropped like a rock. The Charger, the Mustang, the Camaro, all of them soldiered on in name, but they lost much of the raw spirit that made them legends. By the mid-1970s, your average muscle car was a shadow of its former self, with an engine choked by emission systems and a design language that catered more to safety than to speed. Those who loved the heyday of muscle cars felt like they were waking up from a dream, and not a pleasant dream. Some enthusiasts hoarded early models, while others held out hope that the industry would bounce back. A wave of negativity followed these changes, with critics insisting that muscle cars had no place in a world increasingly concerned about air quality and skyrocketing gas prices. Environmental advocates hailed the moment as a victory, while enthusiasts saw it as a disastrous blow to automotive freedom. For a while, it seemed like the muscle car age had ended for good, leaving behind only fond memories and a lot of ticking lumps of American iron in backyard. One that would satisfy both environmental regulations and our thirst for horsepower. By the early 2000s, nostalgia was at an all-time high. Car shows, classic restorations, and reruns of old-school racing footage reminded people that the muscle car era was something special. Enthusiasts clamored for a return to form. Automakers listened. Ford led the charge with a retro-styled Mustang in 2005, capturing the original fastback spirit while packing modern technology like fuel injection, multi-valve engines, and advanced safety features. People went nuts. It was living proof that muscle cars didn't have to remain frozen in time. They could evolve. Dodge followed up with a new Charger, and then a Challenger that looked like it leaped straight out of a 1970s time machine, only with better electronics and a more comfortable ride. Chevy, not to be outdone, brought back the Camaro in 2010 with styling cues that honored the first-generation model. Suddenly, the big three were at it again, duking it out for horsepower superiority. Cars like the Ford Shelby GT 500, Dodge Challenger Hellcat, and Chevy Camaro ZL1 unleashed performance numbers that would blow the tires off any 1970s machine, thanks to superchargers, refined suspension geometry, and advanced traction control. That being said, it's fair to say the modern muscle cars can actually handle corners significantly better than their old ancestors. But of course, there's always a catch. Some enthusiasts argue that modern muscle cars are too refined, too heavy, and too digital. They say part of the charm of classic muscle was the smell of unburned fuel from a 4-barrel carb, the squeak of archaic suspension, and the slightly scary feeling that you were taming a beast with no electronic nannies. Still, the performance numbers speak for themselves. The new wave of muscle machines are safer, more powerful, and surprisingly more fuel efficient, although fuel efficient is still relative. They offer heated seats, premium sound systems, and driver assist technologies that would have seemed like sci-fi in 1970. Whether that's selling out or leveling up is often debated among enthusiasts. Either way, the muscle car is back in a big way, and it seems determined to stick around. At first glance, you might wonder how these big, occasionally impractical, sometimes controversial vehicles have survived in an age of hybrids, EVs, and advanced driver assistance systems. Truth is, muscle cars remain relevant because they tap into something deeply American: the love of freedom, the open road, and the roar of a powerful engine. No amount of technology can quite replicate the gut-punch feeling of launching from a standstill with a snarling V8 under the hood. When all is said and done, there's a reason older muscle cars still fetch top dollar at auctions. They're rolling nostalgia, a link to a time when horsepower was cheap, speed limits were just suggestions, and the only thing on your mind was outrunning the next guy. They also represent innovation in unexpected ways. The push toward more power and performance drove advances in engineering, from better braking systems to improved aerodynamics. Even the meltdown of the 1970s forced automakers to develop cleaner, more efficient engines, which ultimately laid the groundwork for today's performance without the toxic emissions. Controversy aside, muscle cars pushed the envelope on what was possible with production automobiles, shaping the broader automotive landscape. For middle-aged Americans who grew up idolizing these machines, or who recall their parents blasting down the freeway in a GTO, muscle cars are more than just hunks of steel. They're memory capsules. They represent rebellious teenage years, family road trips, or the first time you felt the buzz of raw speed. That's why they haven't disappeared. They've evolved with the times, but kept their defining characteristic: an unapologetic focus on performance. Whether you're eyeing a pristine 1969 Charger, a souped-up Fox body Mustang, or a brand-new Hellcat, you're participating in a tradition that spans decades. Hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for hanging out and exploring the twists and turns in the history of American muscle cars. Power, speed, and nostalgia. Thanks for taking this nostalgia-fueled ride with me. If your heart still races at the rumble of a V8, or if you just love discovering the stories behind iconic American muscle, stick around. There's plenty more automotive lore to explore, and I can't wait to share it with you. If you enjoyed this trip, make sure to smash that subscribe button. Let's keep the muscle car spirit alive, one story at a time.